Good evening, everybody. We're going to give it a few more minutes here while people are logging in. Um, some people it looks like have been trying to get in and get bounced out and coming back in. So the internet may be slow a little today. So we'll give a few more minutes. Did anybody see that Pirates game? Uh, when you see this one,
Pretty bad. I didn't see it.
you have to see it. I have no idea what is going on. I Let's just say the Cubs scored runs. How they scored runs in this situation is beyond me. This is like little league stuff. It is absolutely pathetic. It was an afternoon game, so that's why.
Mhm.
After that Penguins game,
Yeah, it was like a twofer, huh?
bad, 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 bad. We'll all be watching soccer soon.
Not me.
All right, another minute. All right. Oh, no sooner did I say that, we had somebody else join it. We'll go ahead and get started. Jill, I think you are just getting connected. Um, so I'm gonna. It looks like she's spinning here a second. Yeah, she's in. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. What we want to do tonight is take everybody through the initial goals and the major actions that have come out of the discussions and kind of the analyses that the township has done thus far in conjunction with ourselves, and let you guys kind of react to those initial thoughts. And we are going to have, we were originally trying to do something a little bit more interactive, even though we're virtual, because of the Zoom setup and the advertising. We're going to stay within the in the Zoom environment, unfortunately, but we will have some, uh, again, some polls that really are more intended to get people talking about things and reacting more so than getting some statistics. So think of it in terms of we're asking some polling questions. It's really meant to be provocative questions to get people kind of really honing in on specific items that are coming out in the planning effort. I think most people that are on have been on in other meetings. So the first couple slides are just, again, reminding everybody what the township is doing and what the comprehensive plan really means. I'll go through those very quickly. If any of you that are joining for the first time want me to spend more time on those, um, just let us know. You can put something in the chat. Use the raise the hand under the reactions, whatnot. Christian and I are gonna kind of mud and Jeff through the discussion and the individual slides, and at the end of the day, what we're hoping to do is really be able to get kind of feedback in terms of the direction of these the goals and the actions themselves, so that as we put pen to paper in developing the detail of the plan, we're on the mark in terms of where we need to be in terms of the community's aspirations. So with that said, I'm going to share screen and switch then to PowerPoint. And where we are, we're in the third of a series of meetings in terms of public outreach. This started back in March. So again, back when not the first round of COVID in terms of the 2020, but 2021. And we've been having regular kind of discussions in terms of the public over the last 4 months. And what the township is focusing on is their community master plan, what is known in Pennsylvania as a comprehensive plan. And a comprehensive plan focuses on the vision of the future, of what the place wants to be when it grows up. Well, Elizabeth is pretty old. You haven't grown up yet. And communities are constantly changing. So a comprehensive plan, again, and because it's comprehensive is in the title, is meant to be a very broad brush and almost a kind of a systems type of view, looking at things like land use, parks and recreation, housing, municipal services, etc. Well, everything the previous 2 meetings we took everybody through was the first set of meetings was really focusing on issues and discussions. We started getting into possibilities under public meeting number 2, and then number 3 we're getting into, you'll see much more detail in terms of specific recommendations tonight. Again, because we're bound to Zoom, I'm asking everybody to please observe, I think, what everybody's gotten accustomed to, etiquette in terms of mute your microphone. You certainly feel free to speak. I think if you've joined in any of the other meetings, we've always wanted people to have discussion. Just unmute, say, AJ, Christian, I got a question or like to make a point. You can also use the chat. Christian is monitoring that. And raise the hand, which is under the reactions. So again, those of you who are probably pretty accustomed to using Zoom now probably don't need a tour to do that. If you have any trouble, just drop something in the chat, and then Christian and I will try to help you out. Again, we've never had an issue with anybody kind of dominating all the time. We do ask everybody, let everybody have an opportunity to speak, so that notion of 3 minutes, we can certainly circle back and have additional discussion. So no meaning have we ever curtailed anybody from being able to kind of express what their thought is, ask questions, etc. And the last important thing is it is being recorded. Need to keep a record. If you're uncomfortable with that, feel free to drop off the call, but we do need to record the session. So comprehensive plan, again, is a blueprint for the future. It's a vision of what the community wants to be when it grows up. That is, by definition, what it is. It does have meaning, though, when it gets into other township or community policies. For instance, the notion of informing zoning ordinance amendments or standards or requirements that may be in a subdivision, land development type of ordinance. Budget decisions, capital improvement projects, municipal spending, when it comes to budgeting, administrative decisions, and there may be other specific planning points in some cases, downtown revitalization, Main Street revitalization, those types of things. So a comprehensive plan really becomes the underpinning of all those other policies. And and as the previous slide said, it really is intended to help everybody get information to make informed decisions. So it is not a policy on itself. It's not a law. It's adopted by the elected body as a resolution, but it is that foundation stone for a lot of the policies that come down the road. And subsequently, the goals and the aspirations that are defined in the comprehensive plan become extremely important because it's those goals legally that make the tie to your other township policies, such as the zoning ordinance. So if there's a goal in the comprehensive plan to protect and connect open space, or a series of statements, you should be able to look in the zoning ordinance and find those requirements and those standards that allow you to achieve that goal. I just used the open space as an example, but that applies to really the majority of the township policies that they would ever establish. Whether it is other ordinances maybe related to stormwater, whether it's traffic improvements, etc. So these goals that we're going to take you through tonight, really at the end of the day, while they seem like simplistic statements, really become important in terms of, and while they are overarching, their goals, they're very broad brush. They're, if I liken it to airplanes, they're a jet liner 30,000 feet in the air. They're not real close to the ground. They're very broad, all encompassing, or broadly encompassing, but they really are kind of the foundation stone that the detail then gets built on top of. So fundamentally, there are kind of three major goals. They're coming out of the planning effort. The notion of embrace and enhance the community's abundant open space, including unique natural, cultural, and recreation assets. Second is accommodate a balance of targeted development and conservation of natural assets aimed at sustaining the township's rural and suburban character. There's a little bit of crossover on that with the open space, but the balance, I think, is the key word. I think through all the discussions we heard loud and clear, many people saying there needs to be a balance. You need to have some development in the township. It needs to be in the right place. And on the other side, what you pride yourselves on and what draws people to the community is the fact that it's green. You don't want to lose that character or that quality, right? So there's that balancing effect that you're trying to strike. And then the last goal focuses on services. Celebrate and promote the township unique assets and maintain cost-effective services. One of the things that through the comprehensive plan, if you remember in previous meeting, there was discussion in terms of the quality of services that the township provides for the cost of those services. And we had done some benchmarking on some other communities. And there were a lot of services that you guys, it's remarkable that what you're able to do with the budget that you reserve for those services. There's some other ones that you probably do need to put a little bit more focus on and have more spending. But I think that the idea of your services and the quality that you're able to deliver for the cost that they really kind of put back onto the property owners is a good bargain. So from a quality of life and from a bang for the buck, you get a lot of quality service in terms of Elizabeth. When you take those goals and you boil them down in terms of the detail that I'm going to take you through next, they fundamentally fall into 6 categories of actions. The first one is that protect and connect open spaces. The second is looking to the river. Repeatedly, everybody, it's not just about the Allegheny Passage. It's just the charm and the beauty. You'll see some photos this evening. I don't know how you could find a prettier place in terms of that Yawk River Valley, when you're looking at that, how you take advantage of that landscape and that incredible quality that's there. Enhancing civic amenities, broadening housing choices repeatedly heard this, activating commercial opportunities, and then spreading the word, doing a better job in terms of communicating. So, starting with the protect and connect open space, going to take you through why this is so important, and I think the picture tells the whole story. Would you ever imagine that you're in Allegheny County, Pennsylvania? No, it's phenomenal. It's absolutely phenomenal. And unfortunately, it was a really overcast day when we took that photo. You don't get the brightness in terms of the blue sky, but the greenery. And when people keep reiterating the greenery, I think it is an important thing. Now, the notion of the greenery not being connected is somewhat of a potential problem, meaning how do you take your open space areas that you have and get even more out of them because you're able to make sure that they behave as a system and you can interconnect those spaces together. So those are the types of things we started kind of delving into in terms of the specific objectives or recommendations. And so the idea that the plan is going to suggest the township should delineate rural resource areas. So this is a legal mechanism that exists within the municipality's planning code. It allows you to put on a zoning map an area that really should be conserved, lands that should be conserved. They may be important for agriculture, they may be important woodlands, etc. And what it allows you to do is to prioritize those areas, or in this case, not prioritize those areas for sewer and water expansions. You want to see those not have sewer service because they're going to remain largely lightly developed. You want to keep that rural character. So we're thinking that this is probably something that should get woven into the comprehensive plan for the township, because it really gets at that protection of the open space goal that you guys are talking about. Second thing, A2, is designate growth areas. Again, it's another tool that is permissible within the municipality's planning code, so that we can identify not just a zoning district like a commercial area, C1, a residential area, R1. You can actually designate places where you want to see growth occur. When you tie that with A1 and A2, what you're now able to do is direct growth into certain portions of the community. And then other portions of the community, keep it as green as you think is appropriate. So we're suggesting A1 and A2 happen in tandem, and that you really use those growth areas to prioritize where new development occurs or redevelopment occurs. Number 3 is amend the zoning ordinance to permit a broader set of land use types. I think, again, the last committee meeting we had a lot of discussion in terms of particularly in the commercial areas. You're probably not allowed to do as much different types of land uses, and land use, that's a fancy word for saying how you use a property. So whether you could have a shoe store there, you could have a wood shop, you could have a convenience store, I could have a townhouse. Those are all land use examples. But broadening the land uses that are permissible in the township, I think a lot of people have said that probably needs to get addressed. Right sizing lot dimensions. In some cases, people have talked about, well, you still want to live, you want to have a predominance of single family homes. Maybe some districts need to have smaller lot sizes because not everybody wants to maintain a 2-acre or 5-acre lot. Slight increases in densities. Again, I think what people have said before, we really don't see apartment buildings out here, but we certainly could see patio homes, particularly when there are some individuals that don't want to maintain that bigger property and also don't want to leave the township. They just don't have that housing option right now. So you got to permit that in order for development to ever create it. So those are just examples, simple examples of what would happen under A3. A4 is starting to look at the notion of making connections with trails in these open spaces, forming partnerships with non-governmental organizations, what we call an NGO, non-governmental organization, something like a land trust is an NGO, or it could be a government entity. It could be a bureau out of the county, division out of the county, to be able to implement open space and trail planning efforts. Where that's coming from, and I know Kyle has done some research and have discussion. There's other people in the region that are studying Elizabeth Township in terms of how to make some connections between, say, the Allegheny Passage and Round Hill, and then South Park and Settlers Cabin. So really trying to create almost a regional corridor for pedestrians and bicycles. You guys want to participate as a part of those partnerships. Number 5, explore possibilities of making some adjustments to your zoning to allow a development, say a residential development, not require them to necessarily build sidewalks along your streets, but maybe within the open space, they're allowed to have a trail connection. And think of maybe there's a residential development north of Round Hill. You would want to encourage that type of connection from that residential neighborhood to get into the county park. A lot of the developments in Pine Township around North Park, they do exactly that. And so I think looking at things like Round Hill as kind of a hub of open space, plus some of the other properties that surround that area, you can really kind of leverage that and not require things like sidewalks, which are not really the character of Elizabeth Township, but certainly having a trail connection from a residential development to an open space that is Elizabeth Township. A6, this is falling under formulating policies and strategies to improve conditions. This is out of kind of the post-industrial, your environmental legacies. This was a discussion, the last committee that we had, and we're getting into a lot more detail. And I will say this now, behind the scenes, trying to flush out some strategies. But what we have under A6 and A7 is starting to kind of paint a direction of where you possibly are able to do this, is creating partnerships with, say, DEP, some land trusts, and we're just using here Allegheny Land Trust as an example, maybe some of the private property owners that have some of those sites that have environmental legacies, whether it's USX, it's Consul, CNX, pick one. You guys have a lot of them, to explore the cleanup and restoration options. Whether it's related to acid mine drainage or abandoned mine drainage, mine blowouts, subsidence, gob piles, whatever you pick. You have examples of those in the township. The bottom line, and this came out in terms of the last meeting, you're going to have to create some partnerships because the property owners won't be able to do it on their own. No agency is going to be able to do it on their own either because they don't own the properties. And the township can't do it on their own. It takes basically a whole consortium of individuals to do it. The key thing in terms of the recommendation is to actually maybe create a task force that has their express purpose in terms of doing that. And we can talk more about that. But that from our perspective is an important first step. A7 gets back to the municipalities planning code, where you may, and again, you have to evaluate the feasibility as a next step of doing this. We won't be able to do this as a part of the comp plan, but this notion of having development rights on some of these sites that have some environmental liabilities. So an old site that was strip mined, it is zoned today. There is a land use that is permissible on that land. Allowing that property owner to possibly transfer those development rights to some other property, maybe in a designated growth area, because you gave an incentive for them to do that. And they turn around and be able to then give the land to a land trust or something, so there can be environmental cleanup, or there's a community benefit that's provided to the township to do cleanup, is a possible way of you guys being able to see some of those properties that have been lying fallow for decades maybe get back into play. So again, we're trying to make some recommendations that are fairly sweeping, broad brush, but they're falling along the lines of what legally the tools that you have in your toolbox to be able to start to explore. Our guess is it's going to take a combination of several of those steps to be able to see some of those properties come into play. There's not one silver bullet, so to speak, in terms of trying to solve some of these problems. So with that, we're going to ask you guys, Christian's going to throw a poll up based on those 6 or 7 that I just went through. First question is, which one is the most important for the long-term sustainability of the community? And Christian, correct me if I'm wrong, we're going to allow people to choose multiple ones, right?
Yes, correct.
So again, you want to put the poll up? What we're asking you to do, and you can move your little poll thing around. Of those A1 through A7, if you had to pick 2 or 3 of them as the most important for the long term, what do you think those are? Which ones are the most important? Okay, so I got 21 people that have logged in. And Christian, am I reading this right? 7 have voted.
Correct.
All right, so I got a bunch of slackers there. Come on, guys.
They're all so good, it's hard to choose.
I'm going to interpret we're getting to the issue. Is that true?
I'll say one thing, it's certainly a lot of information to absorb.
Yeah, it is. We don't disagree. We don't disagree. And that's the part of the problem with the Zoom is you can't even have a whole lot of discussion. I think there's 4 people that didn't vote. I'll give you another minute. But that's you guys give a pretty good direction. Clearly, in terms of looking at the results, and Christian, you want to end it and share?
Yes.
Okay, so the red are the 2 top ones. So A1, delineate rural resource areas, and then A4, form partnerships to implement regional open space trail planning efforts. A2, falling up right behind, 38%. And then A6, 38% again. So those 4 things really are important. And then I have to say A3, 25% is not too far behind. So I think you guys are clearly given a good sense in terms of kind of those priority areas. All right. So,
Andrew,
yes.
and Andrew, number 6, I personally, I feel it's very important. However, I was a little skeptical about, I wasn't sure if I understood it completely. What I was afraid of is, in that statement, does that mean that, I think it's important to clean up sites that industry, hazardous sites or brown sites that industry has left behind. But does it mean that once it's cleaned up, you're replacing that land with another commercial industry that, so I wasn't sure what that actually meant.
Yeah.
Are they cleaning it up for that land to be used for purposes other than what it had been used for previously, like industry?
And I can't answer your question with a definitive yes, no, clean it up and turn it into trees versus more industries. I think every site is unique and it's going to have to be approached in a different manner. As an example, and this is the reason we spent some time on this one, for tonight was one of the last discussions, Ted and Russ and some other people, we had gone into a pretty rigorous discussion in terms of this your very question. And the complication is, let's just pretend, and we're in a public meeting, so we'll just use generic names. We have property owner A has formerly used a site, and there's some environmental legacies on it. There's some impairments, right? The way the law reads, and in most cases, it is more beneficial, financially beneficial for them just to leave the ground as it is. Because for them to try to sell the property, they're now on the hook of cleaning up those liabilities. So unfortunately, the cards are stacked against the township in terms of that. So we have to find a way to incentivize a property owner saying, okay, there's something I can get out of this property and get myself out of some environmental liabilities. In some cases, transferring the property to another owner may be a way of doing that. In the case of if it went to a land trust, they may end up having to ease that property so it would stay as open space. Now they're going to have to figure out where they're going to get funding to do any cleanup, say, of AMD in the streams or something like that. And again, we're back to a partnership because it's going to take a whole cast of characters of doing that. As a separate example, another property, that property owner B may say the value, because of the location of where that property is, I could redevelop that site for maybe industrial purposes. Yes, I need to clean it up. I'm going to have to partner to get grant funding to be able to help offset some of that cost, but I also need the township to zone the property so I can get some reuse out of it. So there's going to be a recommendation a little bit later that we're going to say the township probably needs to go through and look at each of those properties and better understand what the liability is and maybe what the suitability is in terms of long-term, and prioritize which ones could be used for development in the future versus which ones should probably stay green. Does that make sense, David?
Yeah, here my concern is, for decades and decades, people in the Mon Valley and in Western Pennsylvania have been victimized by industry. And what I mean by that is, like, we've had the mining, we've had the steel mills, and they've all been polluters. They've all been they participated in making our area unhealthy. Allegheny County has the worst air quality in the country. So I don't want to see land that was used as industry previously be cleaned up and an industry come in that's going to continue that legacy of polluting.
Understood.
If I could add something, maybe two, just so, probably about a month and a half ago, we had a meeting with the folks from the Park Commission. Allegheny County Park at Round Hill. And they were in discussion with us about they want to purchase additional properties beyond Round Hill that would extend to the greater Allegheny Trail. And those properties are in the process right now. They are console, or there's some obviously mining, drainage and stuff like that, which they've agreed to clean up, but then preserve that process, Dave, to the trail. And that is in the process of my understanding on our last conversation with the folks that are the directors of the county, that they're looking in doing that. So I do understand what you're saying, but just so that you know, there are, like, in that Round Hill area, they're looking at cleaning up those properties to extend that as part of the park.
Well, I think that's a terrific idea. I think that's the direction that we should be headed. I don't think we should be seeking industry to come into the area and just continue what they've done in the past, and that's sort of rape the land and make the people sick.
I appreciate that. I just wanted to sort of give you an example of how the township is working with the county to, because they asked us what our opinion was. Obviously, before they went out and purchased. I mean, they were looking at purchasing this property from Consol. I mean, that's and they wanted our input on that. So again, that was one of the things that they knew, that we were in this comprehensive plan and they were going in that direction. So I was just trying to explain that piece to you.
All right.
Okay, so I switched the slide to the second question. So the first question was, what in terms of the long term was the most important? This question is about what is needed immediately. So if you had in one fell swoop tomorrow wanted to throw a switch to make a change, which of those 7 items was where you would make the change? Again, it's the same 7 items. It's just the first question was long term. This is about immediate. And I think if you vote on one of this, probably is the best thing to do. Can you guys see the results? I don't know if you can see results.
No.
So when I'm chuckling, I'm watching the results. This is like it's funny. There's a little meter and it keeps changing as people keep adding kind of their vote in, and this is getting interesting. So I think 14 out of 22, 15 out of 22, we'll give another minute for everybody to. All right, Christian, you want to close that? All right. So this is my takeaway. What people are saying is there probably needs to be some zoning change made sooner than later in terms of delineating these growth areas in the rural resource area. At the same time, you're probably working on partnering with a variety of people to start having that conversation what to do about these environmental sites. That makes sense? Okay. Next bucket of topics is looking to the river. And the notion of taking advantage of the 12 miles of the eastern side of the township, and again, absolutely, beautiful scenery in terms of a beautiful place to be.
Mr. Sports, excuse me, I've had my hand up for a while.
Oh, I'm sorry, Dennis. Sorry. Oh, you do. I missed that. Sorry.
But that's okay. I just want to say two general things. Going back to what Dave said previously, and with this wonderful photo that I now see, I cannot find anything more central to the very meaning and significance of Elizabeth Township than its natural placement and beauty. And so through everything we're going to do, whether it's the nature of housing development in the future, everything must be built on the most sustainable, future-oriented ideas. We must become famous for that. Secondly, and it's also a very difficult thing for us due to our topography here. I was reading Gordon Allport, the famous psychologist from the 20th century, and he does have a silver bullet to bring down divisions between people and build up a community. And it's all in a single word. And this too must go through everything we're considering. And that one word is contact. We live, unfortunately, with a 70-year analysis of the curses of suburbia. You know, in your garage, close your garage door to your back deck. You don't have to have contact with anyone else. And that is rapidly changing in any type of new development across the country. And I would like to see us be a spearhead for that, because it's absolutely essential that if we're going to develop any kind of community, we must have contact with each other, not just at sporting events, not just a little hand wave as you drive down the street, but we must be able to talk to each other about our real human needs, our interests, our perspectives on life here, life in our nation, and the ever-growing closer life of the world. So those two things, sustainability in every aspect and contact in every way possible, will build a strong community within this gorgeous, lush, natural environment. That's my general comment.
Yeah, I'm going to steal your words, Mr. McAndrew.
I'm sorry, I did.
I'm
Yes,
going to steal your words.
Oh, that's okay. Go ahead. Feel free.
All right. So again, on the river side, I mean, I think what everybody has rallied around was the notion of, yes, there's the beauty of the river, and yes, there's the trail, but there's so much more that could be happening on that side. Now, there is, again, as that photo indicates, again, the terrain in the township is really abrupt. You're in a very steep hillside in some cases, and then you get into a broad floodplain in other cases. So the idea of looking to the river was really trying to leverage as much potential related to the natural beauty or to the recreation, the tourism assets that the river and the trail create. So B1 was trying to introduce the concept of having some changes in terms of the zoning ordinance to allow more infill development in places like Buena Vista, where you're able to have maybe different housing types, maybe more neighborhood scale commercial development that could take advantage of the trail or a boat ramp, etc. And B2 was further, which has been discussed in terms of previous meetings, maybe there is a river specific zoning district that's created. You have, when you look at your zoning map, you have a couple places that are mixed use districts, but really starting to think of the river as one entire corridor and what is the appropriate zoning. And to go back to some of the previous discussion in terms of whether Dennis or David meant this, having a manufacturing plant down on that river corridor is not the right thing. Having something that is small scale, I can have a wood shop, I can have an industrial use, it just needs to be small scale, right? That's what everybody's talking about. So the idea of kind of tuning that river district to the uses, whether it's retail, residential, Like I said, craftsman types of things. I think that is the type of district that people are starting to kind of settle on and point to. Tom, you have your hand up?
Yes, sir. Good evening, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen. Sorry. A year and a half ago, I purchased the property down the Johnson's Funeral Home. The purpose of purchasing it was partially to put my business in the garage section of it. And my plan for the remainder of it, there's a 5,600 square foot house there. And my plan was to put in a bed and breakfast there, which I felt would be very good along the trail there, since there's obviously the trails right there and the boat launches right there as well. However, one of the problems that I run into whenever I research the idea and think to myself, if I'm pedaling down the trail and I want to stop for the night, I don't want to be able to, grab something to drink, something to eat and everything like that. And commerce is an issue for my particular location. At this point in time, I haven't moved forward with anything down there, but I would like to in the future. But again, like the commerce is an issue. Person comes in there, unfortunately, we lost our local store there to a fire back a few months back. So now I'm down to nothing for them to, be able to get to, unless I were to put in a little store or vending machines or whatever the case would be. But I don't think it would be busy enough initially to warrant doing that. So I think that one of the big things that we need to look at in this township is commerce and what we can do to make it a more attractive township. There's a lot of people that are hung up on the idea of not going across a bridge, and I like the idea. We want to try to keep everything in the township as much as we can. But the problem is that, we've been so negligent, I guess would be the way to put it, on doing it. Unfortunately, where I'm at down in Buena Vista, we have a flood issue, and that hurts us, significantly for being able to put any commerce in at all.
Right.
But, it's just my thoughts on the matter.
So you would be in support of having some sort of zoning that's really tuned to allow that type of thing along the river corridor?
Absolutely. Tastefully done, please.
Tastefully done. Understood. Okay, B3. Go ahead. I don't know who's Dennis, is that you?
No, I'm sorry.
Okay, B3 is identify strategic areas of locations to implement connectivity projects. So again, this gets back to there's some places. If you think about what Mr. Rocco had pointed out a little while ago, that there's the potential of interconnecting, say, Round Hill over to the Allegheny Passage. Okay, there's some terrain there. There's no question. It's Elizabeth Township. There is no question. But the fact that you could have an east-west bike ped spine as some sort of trail, whether you're riding through parkland or you're in easements on a, that you work out with adjoining property owners, you now have a connection almost over to the 51 corridor. And I believe Mr. Ball's on the call on the west side of the park. You're almost beginning to create this corridor that almost is this interstate, so to speak, for pedestrians and bicyclists, whether you're hiking, walking your dog, riding a bike, etc. And then obviously you have the granddaddy interstate of the Allegheny Passage itself. That there are some probably strategic locations where making some trail connections, the township needs to take on kind of a leadership role and be an instigator in terms of some of those projects. So that's what B3 is. B4 is the notion of looking at developing what we call Blue Ways plan, and that's creating a comprehensive vision for the river. So in some cases, some groups like Pennsylvania Environmental Council and DCNR will have kind of their designated kind of canoe kayak routes, and the Blue Ways plan builds upon that. So where you want to have water access points, where there does need to be obvious places that a van could pick up a series of canoes or kayaks, and that you have that type of support. And so the Blue Ways plan allows you to look at the river for the asset that it is. Because the comprehensive plan, again, is looking at the overall township. The Blue Ways is really focusing on the yacht. So another poll, question 3, of those items, long-term sustainability.
Hi, Andrew.
Yes, go ahead, Tim.
All right. I'm sorry, AJ. So the question before about you saying that there was going to be perhaps some areas, or are you saying the entire river itself? Like the last meeting that we had, you had said that there could be some targeted areas that you could put in some stuff versus opening up the entire river itself. So what are you looking at in this?
I think, again, Ted, without getting into actually starting to look at the detail of zoning, I'm going back to this photo. If you think of where the trailhead is there at Sutersville, you hit that section of the trail, that hillside is so super steep, right? To get up, that's the Console property. I'm just using that as an example. The trail corridor is pretty much the only thing at the foot of the hillside. So the development potential in that area is pretty minimal. I think you do want to look at places like what's on the screen right now, use those as where the river district is. Now, I think your mixed use stops short of that. So it's not meant to be a new version of a mixed use. I think you got to broaden what you've done with your mixed use districts and your current zoning. And you got to be a little bit more holistic in terms of that approach. But I think you probably think of it as charms on a charm bracelet. There's a few hot spots as you move along the corridor that you really want to have. And I think you also kind of want to rally around where there are things like trailheads, because those are the reason the trailheads are there. Those are the logical places to be able to get onto the trail. Now, if you couple that with the Blue Ways, the notion of I got canoe kayak now and fishing, there's where I think your pattern becomes kind of self-evident. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I was just wondering when those statements was made, I was just trying to, get it down some more. Yes, it makes sense. Thank you.
Okay, so again, in terms of long-term, B1 through 4, which is the one that you think is the most important in terms of long-term? And in this one, because there are only 4, vote for 2. The Dennis, don't vote for all of them. Only vote for 2. Okay, 13 out of 22 have voted. Give everybody another minute or so.
I think that it's kind of difficult in those specific areas that you show on the picture to be able to put any type of commerce or any additional building in there, because most of what you see along there is below the current Allegheny Passage Trail, and that area is all considered flood zone. So to put any type of commerce or residential development in there, that's mostly developed already for people.
Yeah, and Tom, the photo wasn't. That's not the only place. We're talking conceptually of you want to get zoning in place along the trail that is conducive and supportive of the trail. And like you said, gives you the opportunity for some economic vitality. So as a next step, you got to really bore into where those locations are. This question is just trying to, I guess, confirm that that is something the township should seriously start taking a look at. Does that help?
I agree. I agree with that.
Christian, you want to close it? So this one's pretty clear. I mean, it's B1 and B2. So you guys are clearly saying, hey, again, we got to make some changes to the zoning, and yeah, Christian, AJ, you're probably right. We should probably have a zoning district that is river specific and is really kind of driven by the river and the trail and the recreation and kind of the amenity that they present themselves. The other two start to fall a little bit further behind in terms of importance. Christian, you want to go to the next one. So this one, gonna do this, I think this is the last time we're gonna ask this question in terms of the immediate. Of those four, which one, you only get one vote on this one, which one would you want to see have implemented ASAP? And going back to those four again, just to remind everybody. Just do long term. Well, this one might get interesting.
Andrew,
Yes.
I have one comment about it. It sort of pertains to B1 and housing, like new housing in the area. And my opinion would be what we need is some sort of kind of patio home. And the reason why the reason why I say that is because generally older people are looking to move into that kind of an arrangement. And for the township, that's an ideal situation because you have, you raise the tax base, but you don't increase the population for the school district. So you don't have, you don't have additional busing, you don't have additional costs to the school district, but yet you get the revenue, the additional revenue with that kind of plan, like a patio plan.
Yep.
So
We're completely with you. And what I should have said, under B1, you'll see that missing middle style housing. Missing middle is exactly what you described.
okay.
So and it's a planning term. Sorry, that was planning jargon. The idea of having almost a lateral move. So if the resident doesn't want to leave, but they want a smaller unit, they don't want as much land, something like a patio home, a duplex, etc. Which again, if you go look at your zoning, there's very few places where that's actually permissible. So that is something we're in lockstep with what your thought is on that.
All right.
Christian, do you want to share? So again, this one is even further in terms of more clarity. The notion of changing some of the housing zoning, adding more housing options, and trying to focus a little bit more on the commercial side, not necessarily permitting Walmarts, but neighborhood commercial types of neighborhood scale commercial uses. All right, we'll move on to the next one. Okay, enhanced civic amenities. And this is, again, an amenity could be anything from park, it could be a trail, it could be gateways, etc. In the notion of you being able to kind of promote the community through what people see from the civic side. There's been numerous discussions in terms of more investments are needed, and this is something that in the long term, not necessarily was a top priority in the past, but in order to attract new residents and to keep residents, you do have to find that balance in terms of making some investments, because that's what people, they want the civic life. And to go back to Dennis's contact, that's the social place. You meet people on the trail. You meet people at the neighborhood park. You meet them at the swimming pool in Buena Vista, as an example. So, the first recommendation is to complete a comprehensive park recreation open space plan. That's something that is a kind of a study. You do have numerous green, park sites within the township that the township owns. But you also have the unique situation where you have the county park, you have the Allegheny Passage, and you have Allegheny Land Trust properties that are land trust properties that has some right of public access. So it's probably time for you guys to do a study and better understand how to best utilize those spaces. There are some, I'm not criticizing, it's going to sound like a criticism. There are some of the green spaces that you have that really are tired. They need some new life breathed into them. And at the same time, you got other needs. And so the point of the studies is to prioritize when it's time to do those types of things and what to invest in terms of the future. C2 is the notion, and this has been a discussion of what to do with community center, or the whole notion of community space. Whether you renovate, whether you take, you develop something new. Those are all studies that, again, DCNR typically funds communities on. So both C1 and C2 are all things that the township could go do a grant application to DCNR and try to get matching money. And both those studies are usually a 50-50 match. To answer some people's questions, I think everybody has said we really need these community space. We need a community space. All right, how big? How much money? Those are all things the feasibility study should be answering. So you can determine what's within your means, what you're able to support. Do I build a partnership with somebody else? Increasingly, we're seeing communities partner with, say, a YMCA to build that type of facility, because neither entity wants to bear it themselves, but they can do it working together. That's just an example. I'm not suggesting advocating, just using that example. That's what the feasibility study should be able to kind of get you at. So in terms of this question of those two things, what do you think is needed in terms of the long term? And Christian, if you want to throw the poll up. And again, that park study, just to clarify, that should be looking at not only assets that the township owns, but it's looking at how they relate to, say, the county park, Allegheny Hollow Oak, Dead Man's Hollow, etc.
Can we see what C1 and 2 say?
Post the statements again, please.
Yep, sorry.
Thank you.
Sorry, Ted.
What about the Chapel Drive property?
That should all be a part of the C1 and study. All those properties should get studied as a part of the comprehensive park recreation open space plan. How it could best be used, how to pay for it, what it would cost to improve it. All that, those types of tasks are typically a part of those studies. Maybe another 30 seconds here. It looks like almost everybody's voted. You want to close that one, Christian? So I guess a long term, again, this is a long term, would be, really getting your arms around the entire kind of system, if you want to look at things as a system, whether it's an undeveloped property, whether it's a property the township currently owns and has used, for recreation, all that could be accommodated as a part of a C1 type of thing. And again, what we have put on the slide is there's the potential of going to the DCNR, to the state, and trying to get some funding assistance, because those are fairly common studies. All right, and we're going to skip over the immediate. So D is broaden housing choices. And so the notion of, again, I think, David, you're the one that raised the notion of patio homes. This has been talked about numerous times. You're largely single family. I think most people like single family, but you're also largely larger lot. And that's where I think some people are starting to say, I'm not necessarily sure I want to keep maintaining that 2 acre, 3 acre lot. I don't want to mow all that grass when I'm 70 years old. And the idea of, well, I don't want to really leave the township. This is where I lived for 35 years. And so having a place where I can get a duplex on a smaller lot, or have a patio home, maybe it is that it's treated more as a common area type of development. I really don't own I may own a garden in the back, but I don't really own a lawn, and there's an association that takes care of all that stuff. Those are the types of things that, when we say broadening the housing choices, that we've interpreted people really kind of indicating. And so, again, David, you're a couple slides ahead of us. D1 is tailoring, the broadening the housing to include things like duplexes, patio homes, carriage houses, townhomes, accessory dwellings. We did not include apartments there. We've heard that repeatedly. In terms of having a 3-4 story apartment building is not Elizabeth Township. We got it. We didn't include it. If we're off base on that, tell us. But I think what we did here was the ones that we included in D1. The second thing, D2, was when you do broaden housing, maybe we direct that housing to go into those places that are the designated growth areas. So here's where recommendations are beginning to fit together into an overall strategy. Early discussion, you clearly said we need to designate rural resource areas, and we should designate growth areas. This one is now saying, if we're going to allow some more diverse housing in the community, maybe those should also get directed to the designated growth areas. D3 is starting to look at things like development incentives, whether that's tax abatements. This came up in a recent meeting, restructuring development fees in terms of the cost for tap-ins, SOAR tap-ins, etc., to be able to give incentives for a builder or a developer to create new housing stock. Because it's one thing to say, and I think most people would be in agreement, we need more patio homes and duplexes to be able to really satisfy our long-term housing needs. It's one thing to say that. We got to have a way for somebody to build it. And so in some cases, this notion of D3 having some incentives to be able to do that would be it. And then D4 is clearly trying to further leverage these designated growth areas. So again, in terms of long-term, so the question is, of those 4 things, long-term, what do you think are the most important? And what I would suggest is 2 votes on this one. So you can vote for any one of the D1 through 4, 2 of them.
Mr. Schwartz, I would just like to add a little bit to possibly the first D1.
Yeah.
And I think we should give serious concern and maybe learn from the Rachel Carson Eco Village up in Gibsonia. It's a different style of community and housing that is called co-housing. And at the same time, it continues, I think, a much more vibrant kind of mixing of people, old and young and so on. I'm afraid that if we tailor things too much toward older adults, being one myself, that things could become very stale. I think communities that really seem to prosper seem to have a great mixture of people with children, adults of all ages, racial types, ethnic backgrounds and so on. So I think that's what we should encourage and possibly work with them to develop our own co-housing project out here with a different, more natural kind of twist to it. Just an idea in the list of possibilities.
I'm making notes. Not ignoring you.
If I can step in here for a moment, if nobody minds, I agree with the concept of the patio homes and everything. Earlier in this conversation, in this meeting, someone brought up that by adding patio homes, we're not going to be increasing the burden on the school district system. I'm not sure that we can, that I can agree with that, because what's going to happen is someone like myself, I'm 61 years old, so, I'm not a spring chicken. At some point in time, if I move into a patio home, then that makes my home available for a young family or something like that to come in. So I think that we're going to still be, putting the increased burden on the school district. But I think at the same time, it's going to enhance our township and give us the opportunity for mom and dad to move into a patio home where they can live comfortably and easily, and have family homes open up and available for new residents to come into our township. Certainly, if anybody watches any of the real estate, you'll notice that nothing stays on the market too long in this township. It moves very fast. And a lot of times I know several that have sold above asking price. I don't know that I could do something like that. I mean, I seem like I have to beat somebody down all the time to feel comfortable to get a good deal. But everybody, several of people that I know sold their homes and they ended up with more than they asked for to start with. So, but I highly support the idea of the patio homes. It certainly is going to make the life easier for our elder residents.
Yeah. Just a comment. I owned a patio home in Gibsonia, and I can tell you, I lived there for, 6 or 7 years, and it was really easy living. I mean, you didn't have to do anything. And it was a great community. It was a close community. People got together. It was just really a good experience.
I think that I think you have to realize with Gibsonia, there's a significant amount of commerce up there and everything like that as well. Even though it is a rural setting, there's a lot of commerce up there, and that's good for the seniors as well. So yeah. I think if we look at it, we have to look at, I'm a large advocate of getting more commerce in the township. I really am. I love this township. I grew up in the city, and I moved out here 40 years ago, and I'm going to die in this township.
Okay, so we got 13 people out of 21 that voted. So some people still need to kind of weigh in on this one. Are you running out of steam? Is that what's going on?
I can smell dinner getting closer to being ready.
Okay, let 2 people just voted. We'll let it go another 20 seconds. Actually, Tom, you're right. Dinner sounding pretty good. And Dennis, feel free to call me AJ. Don't call me Andrew. That's when my mom's mad at me. All right, Christian, if you want to go ahead, close. So broadening the housing choices, and then right behind it, which is related to it, it's one thing to encourage the development. It's another, you got to change the zoning. So D1, D4 are kind of packaged together. And literally right behind that is this notion of the designated growth areas. So I'm interpreting that because the rural resource area and the designated growth areas has been a high, it appears that there's high appeal to that. You guys, you are seeing that that is a good tool to be using to kind of shape where things should be going in the community. So there's areas that can stay green, and then there's other places that, as we talked about in a previous discussion, that there's development surrounding it that's infill the places that haven't developed in those areas and really kind of direct the development. That's the right path, it seems like. Is that everybody in agreement on that? All right. I don't hear any dissenters, so. Okay, activate commercial opportunities. And so again, we tie this, and this was coming out of some previous discussions, with the notion of commerce really should be happening in those designated growth areas, or, and yes, David, this is where you were going earlier in terms of the discussion, there may be some brownfield sites that it could be redeveloped for some commercial use, whether that's industrial use or retail. That's all dependent upon really what the legacy of the property is and largely where it's located. But I think what people have in the past said, if we have had land that was been disturbed in the past and now is sitting fallow, maybe first priorities, rather than rip up a greenfield, so to speak, or property next to the balls, let's really kind of focus on the places that have had some past disturbance and prioritize those. So that's what we're trying to do in terms of E1, is direct commercial development to those previously developed sites, whether it's for retail, restaurants, or some industrial stuff. E2 is starting now to investigate, because we know that there is some land that is zoned commercially that has never been developed. I think the township needs, and this should happen when they're doing their zoning update, is take a look at why those properties haven't ever been developed for commercial. Is it because the ground is too steep? Is it because the soils are bad for that type of development? Is it because they don't have easy access to sewer and water? Is it because they don't have visibility? So there's a little bit of, this is what I'm going to use some planning jargon again. That's what we call right sizing, where you have to make some adjustments to your zoning map that, okay, today's world, what we drew up 20 years ago doesn't work anymore. We need to make changes. We need to right size it, get it back into some sort of equilibrium. So E1, E2 is really starting to kind of bore into where is the most appropriate places for commercial development, and then go back and start to fix the zoning map to be able to do that. Because I do think there's probably some places that are zoned commercially on your map today that probably don't make sense. And there's other places that probably should be zoned commercially, because you probably, from a real estate standpoint, would see some activity. E3, inventory and access industrial legacy sites, so you can really understand what the extent of the cleanup and the restoration will be needed is. This is an example of partnering with somebody like DEP to simply go on a map, look at where all those sites are, doing a quick assessment, because most of the sites, the liabilities are somewhat known, and being able to then determine which ones, how to characterize each one of those, so that then you can start to determine what is the right land use in the future for those sites. And then E4 is going one step further of prioritizing which of those legacy sites has some sort of redevelopment potential. And so, David, this gets back to your question. I'm not sure every site can be treated the same way. Some are going to lend themselves to some development, and from the tax-based standpoint, it may make sense to let them be redeveloped. You may have to change the zoning to allow that to happen. Others of those sites maybe want to stay green. And then the challenge is figuring out how to get them to become green. Are you using things like the land trust to be able to take on the ownership, transfer the liabilities, those types of things? So E1, E2 is really starting to look at kind of the commercial development and in the zoning map you currently have. E3 and E4 is looking at the individual properties of these former really largely industrial areas and figuring out what their problems are, how they best could be reused, and then prioritizing which ones have market potential so that you focus your time on those. Because the ones that have the potential is the ones you want to see some sort of change occur. Because the other ones, if the market's not there, I'm not sure what to tell you. You could be spending an awful lot of time spinning your wheels and not show any progress. Does that make sense? Anybody have any questions on that one? And then the last one, E5, is explore the applicability of enhancing broadband infrastructure. So again, you got, and I think, David, you were starting to get into, there's maybe clean industries in the future. If there's industry, it wants to be clean industries. Well, clean industries need an awful lot of utility, whether it's power, whether it is communication. And in some cases, you're going to have to boost up what you have in terms of the township to be able to support that. And that probably is one of the criteria of determining what happens on an E4. Because some of those sites may not have infrastructure in close proximity, you know, whether it's broadband or natural gas, et cetera, to be able to support some sort of market potential. So E5, I think, cuts a lot of different ways.
So I have a comment, if I could.
Yep.
So the concern, I sort of sent this off to you earlier, the concern is basically if some of these areas that had a legacy to it is surrounded by other areas that don't have a legacy to it. Like putting something in an area that specifically had problems and that's where that goes versus putting it in an area near where a problem was, I think is a different statement.
Yep. And Ted, I think what we're simply saying is when you're going through E3 and E4, you take those considerations, those exact considerations that you just laid out, a part of that review and analysis in terms of what those sites could be or should become in the future. And then you're just, all we're saying is because you have numerous of them, you probably do need to prioritize which ones are the most likely to see some sort of change. And I'm being honest, I'm saying this, and I probably shouldn't say this in a public forum. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. There are some property owners, it doesn't matter what you guys decide or kind of determine through an assessment. You may not be able to get a property owner off a dead center because of what I said earlier on, and I truly believe it. We work on a lot of brownfield sites that until that property owner can see a path of either getting rid of the liability that's around their neck, or they're able to get out with some sort of profit on that property, in most cases, it's just better for them to keep it the way it is, because that's the way the rules are written. So in terms of poll, Christian, you want to throw that up? The long term of Tom, you were going to ask a question or make a comment?
Yeah, I did have a question. What I'm wondering, like, as an example of the legacy properties, I mean, obviously brownfield wise, we know the Fury property up on,
Yep.
that would be one of them. But what are some of the other examples in the township that we're considering to be legacy properties?
Well, Mr. Rocco had pointed to the console property, the CNX property that the county had approached CNX to say, you know, we'd like to put an offer on the property.
That would be the old Warden Mine.
That's over on Forest Hill Road. Douglas
Oh.
Road to Forest Hill, that big hillside. It's a big knob.
Okay, no, I was thinking that they were talking about what was Warden Mine years ago.
That can be too. So the one I was picking, the CNX, it looks like it's largely wooded until you get into the interior of the property, and there's what we call GOB piles. There's slag and mine, not slag, there's mine residue that's on that property that is leaching. So it's leaching stuff every time it rains. That water, you know, goes somewhere and eventually makes its way to the bottom of the hill, which is where the passage is, right? And so when you're riding on the passage, that swale that's at the base of that hill, you guys all know it's running orange. I mean, it's thick as paint down there in terms of how much A&D comes down off of that hill.
We definitely gained significantly by them putting the sewer line down through the trail.
Yep.
Company that did that did a tremendous job of recovering the property and everything. I don't know how many people have had the opportunity to go down there, but it's true. They did a truly fantastic job recovering that property, and certainly is going to enhance, you know, people's interest in going that way. That's for sure.
But Tom, to answer your question, there's probably 25 properties scattered around the township in varying sizes. I mean, some of them are enormous and some of them are small. You know, just a couple acres and that's it.
Okay, I was just curious exactly what we were talking about. Thank you very much.
So there's about 5 people of the 22. Now, I'm really going to kind of push you guys because this one's a really important one from our perspective. It's been talked about numerous times.
How many choices do you want us to make here?
Well, you got 5 on there, so I'm going to give you 2 this time. Thanks for asking. I should have said that.
While people are voting, AJ, I'd just like to get an idea what other townships have done to try to study and get an inventory of all of these sites. This is really important stuff, but it is mind-boggling as a commissioner for me to think about how to go about that. Do you have any suggestions?
Well, and I think it gets back to the earlier, one of the very early things you guys want to do is sit down and say, hey, DEP, we'd like to have a meeting. And we want to study X, Y, and Z in the township. And we need some of your expertise to be able to help us understand what's going on with some of these properties, because we want to make some changes to our zoning. We want to understand what it takes in some cases to put projects, meaning properties, back into play. You know, whether that means be protected as green space, whether that means be redeveloped. But the crux of it is cleaned up. They have programs so that you're able to then use some of their programs to be able to tap into to get grant money to do those types of studies. So we're working on one, which is paid through an EPA grant. This is in Johnstown. So again, an engineering firm that, you know, has a kind of an environmental focus. They're the ones that typically do those types of studies. But in Johnstown, I think they probably looked at 20 different sites. And they basically are doing a kind of a visual review assessment. They're going back to property records to understand how the properties were previously used. They're looking at any other reports or complaints that have been filed. And they're able to at least give you assistance of what are the problems on that site and what they would need to be able to, the property owner would need to do to be able to clean it up to meet today's environmental standards, to be able to reuse it, whether it's for residential use or commercial use, industrial use. And again, the importance of those, and David's question early on is a really important question. The cleanup that is needed varies depending upon how you're going to use the property in the future. So that's why we were saying you really need to do an E3 and an E4. So to answer your question, I really think you want to sit down with, people at like DEP and say, here's our problem. Here is what we want to try to achieve at the end. We're trying to make changes to our zoning. And at the same time, try to get some of these properties out of being fallow and either become really green or get reused in some way, shape, or form. Fallow is not helping us. It's not helping anyone. All fallow is right now is just kind of, it's almost like being in purgatory, and the property owner is the only one that gets any benefit, and is they don't have to spend any money, and there's no recourse on their end. So long as they don't do anything, they don't try to improve the property, they don't have to clean it up. All right, about 15 to 21, give everybody about 30 seconds more.
Andrew.
Yes.
I have a comment. E5, I think something that we're being, I think, real short-sighted about is we have the Yaak River. Not only do we have the Yaak River, but we have the Mon River by Elizabeth. Something that it's a new technology that I think we should really be looking into. It's called micro hydro generators. They're small electric generating units that go into a stream, a river. They don't damage the environment. They don't harm the fish. I think that the Yaak River is such a prime location for a technology like that I think we should look into that.
Okay. All right, Christian, you want to close that one? So E3 is the winner, and I would say it's ahead of most of the other ones. And that's the one that's get an inventory and start to understand what's going on in terms of those legacy sites. So that's good direction. E1 and E3 following up right behind, as is E2, but clearly behind that notion of E3. Good one. All right, last one section in terms of spreading the word, which is fundamentally how you guys communicate. Oh, Christian, I missed this. Fix this before you post this on the website. You missed the I in communication.
Okay, will do, sorry.
Sorry about that. We don't like spelling errors. All right, so the notion, everybody has talked about this, and the township, just in the time that they've been working on the comp plan, has been doing things to try to improve communication, get the word out, tell your story. And every community has a story. And I hate to say it, but I gotta say it this way. You're in competition with your neighbors. You're in competition with other communities in Allegheny County, Westmoreland, and Fayette County. You're in competition for residents. You're in competition for tax base. You're in competition for kind of perception and stature. So the notion of being able to tell your story and be able to communicate what is great about the community, I think from our perspective is one of the most of the utmost. And so this is really much on the municipal service side. A lot of times, while the public may see the end story, they don't really realize all the stuff behind the scenes that it needed to be done, or steps that needed to be taken to be able to kind of get the information out. Comment I made earlier in terms of the municipal services, the fact that your taxes have been stable for so long and that you're able to still provide a high level of service in many respects, it's something you got to be able to share with people. They need to be able to understand it. But at the same time, they also have to be able to understand that you're reaching a breaking point where you can't be able to have the same amenities that you've gotten accustomed to or you want to have with the same spending, right? So part of messaging and communicating is not only touting kind of your success stories, but also the importance of building awareness of why sometimes tough decisions need to be made. And so the notion of being able to use technology to better improve some of your municipal operations. There's a variety of things, whether it's in public works, whether it's in planning and zoning, just in terms of finance. Yeah, we're going to get into a little bit more detail in terms of the recommendations, but that's largely what F1 is about. And again, it's not sexy. It's not something that is like a huge policy change that affects property owners, but it does have a major effect in terms of kind of how the township is reaching out to the larger community. F2 is all about how you get your word out, how you communicate, using things like Facebook, social media to your advantage. Doing things like real estate, what we call real estate breakfasts or real estate roundups, so that you can convene on, say, every 6 months on a Friday morning, all the real estate brokers that are active in the township, and let them know what the township is working on in terms of making changes to the zoning ordinance. Why am I going to real estate professionals? Because they talk. I don't know if any of you guys are real estate or realtors that are on the phone, but they talk to their neighbors, they talk to their clients, they talk to prospective buyers, and the word gets out. And then before long, you then have land developers, et cetera, that now know what the township is trying to do. And so it gets you guys on the radar screen. So communication isn't just about websites and social media, but it's who you're reaching out to in strategic points in time and providing information about what is going on, what the township's aspirations are. F3, public relations campaign. And that the whole thrust of this is the notion of retaining, attracting residents. Things like newsletters, postcards that go out. Did you know the DIY kind of notice that goes out and tells people about the accomplishments in the township or value that you're all getting in terms of from the community, in terms of your taxes and the amenities and assets. And then F4, from our perspective, is probably one of the, I don't want to jade this in terms of your voting, but you gotta, again, back to my comment of you're competing, you have to think of the community to some degree, but in today's world, as a brand. What is the identity of Elizabeth Township? There's words that we can all throw out on the table that kind of characterize the township. It's a green place. It's a little bit of paradise, you know, in terms of when you look at some of those photos. It's friendly. When you start taking those words and you start framing them and you build a brand, that is then what you're trying to communicate to visitors, whether it's through gateways, when you first come into the township. Can anybody point to a gateway into Elizabeth Township that's on the call right now? Sign that says, welcome to Elizabeth Township. I'm not talking the little blue sign that PennDOT puts up along a 148 or 48 or something like that. You don't. There aren't any. And so if you think of a place like Cranberry Township, and I'm picking Cranberry because they years ago, they came up with this idea. They wanted to be, when Westinghouse was moving the headquarters to Cranberry, they wanted to let the world know they were an international community. they went to the school district and they said, how many languages, how many people that students in the school district, Seneca Valley, speak, something beyond English? And what they found was there were over 60 different languages that students spoke. They went and they created some sort of branding identity that had 60 different flags of those nations or those tongues, so to speak. And that became a part of their letterhead. That became a part of what you would see on any communication, because they wanted that image to be communicated to the outside world, that they were an international community, right? And I'm just using that as an example of where they went with this whole notion. So the idea of coming up with some sort of brand or unique identity that you can be kind of setting yourself apart from your neighbors, I think is an important one, because you got a great story to tell. You need to start telling that story. You have to figure out what is that story to tell and how do you communicate that. Catherine, you have your hand up. Catherine?
I'm sorry, I have to unmute myself. I'm just wondering how the installation of a gas-fired power plant might affect that brand.
That's all a fair question. It's all a fair question. And I think when you settle on what the community identity is, and we're starting to get at that with the goals. I mean, clearly, and I think as you guys have seen, these conversations kind of progress, and as we're getting more and more detail and more words on the paper, we're honing into kind of what that identity of the community is. Decisions in terms of, again, somebody could propose something, you guys don't necessarily have the ability to shape that. How you accommodate that, again, you got to be within your legal ability to be able to regulate, but at the same time, you're limited in terms of how much you can regulate. But your question is an important one in terms of the outside world perception. All right, Christian. Paul? Long term, again, long term.
And this was just one?
Yeah, good point, Ted. Well, I think one on this one makes sense. Forces you have to make some decisions. Okay, give you another 30 seconds or so. Well, this one I think is safe to say, winner, winner, chicken dinner. Chris, you want to go ahead and close it? Clear winner on this one. Consistent messaging in terms of outreach and communication. Again, I think that's been expressed before, but that just drives home the point. Okay, so the next set of slides, and we're almost done here. So next set of slides is just really kind of laying out what we're working on in terms of the next steps. So kind of thinking through the input you guys have given tonight, starting to hone things and refine things. In some case, go back, you've thrown a couple things on the table, may have to go back and rethink a little bit and make some more than a refinement type of adjustment. But what we also are trying to do is lay out a table in terms of actions, in terms of importance. And one of the things that we are also trying to be mindful of, there needs to be actions that can be done without a whole lot of resource, whether that's time resource or money resource. And there's other ones that are going to take a little bit longer time frame to actually implement. And there's others that are going to take a little bit more resource, meaning dollars probably, to be able to really kind of delve into. We don't want to have a plan that is chock full of only expensive aspirational things that the township is never going to be able to implement or won't be able to implement anytime soon. So we're trying to strike a balance in terms of that approach. So we're starting to work on that. The other thing that we're starting to do is be able to delineate more specificity where things could happen in terms of specific improvements. And so, again, we're just using an aerial image here to kind of make the point of, and again, I think a map works for a lot of people. A photo that kind of melds with a map probably is the ultimate, because it gives you your wayfinding, and you can say, oh, that's where the Dairy Queen is, or the what is it, Twisty Freeze? What's the right here? Whoops. What is it?
It's Twister.
Yeah.
Twister.
So being able to give you kind of images that are starting to lay out, all right, here's a potential gateway location. Here is an intersection that from a safety standpoint probably needs to get re-examined. Whether that's at the county level, whether that's at the PennDOT level, because there's some safety issues. I'm telling you, it is absolutely amazing how much traffic happens at that intersection at the trailhead. And I'm not telling you anything you guys don't already know. And there again, there's that opportunity in terms of partnership, whether it's the Allegheny Passage Conservancy, whether it's PennDOT, et cetera, to really be able to, okay, what is the best thing that needs to be done in that area? This is a simulation. So we're just trying to show you the plan's going to have a whole series of graphics and maps that starts to tune specifics, the specific recommendations to the geography of where they're being proposed. This is another example. And this is the notion of, to Tom's point, in some of the places, if we can get some commercial activity, we should be pinpointing where that would occur. And then in some cases, we may have to overlay where the floodplain is, just to illustrate to everybody that that area is outside of the floodplain, and there's some viability to doing that. And then how maybe connections from a wayfinding signage, et cetera, where connections possibly should be made in terms of the long term. So I can pull somebody from the trail up to a place that you're trying to create a gateway, or get them into Boston, in this case, to some of the shops, restaurants, et cetera, that are on the main drag. So in the course of the next couple weeks and month and a half, we're going to be working on the detail of that, so that we can get a full document to the elected body, so they can in the committee, so they can be working through kind of the detail of the narrative. So I think your input tonight is helping shaping what we're doing in terms of the recommendations, but more specifically in the input you gave in terms of the polls, it's really starting to tell us specifically where the priorities are, which will help us back on that implementation, that action table that I showed you in terms of prioritizing what really needs to happen in the short term versus stuff that maybe happens in a little bit long term. And then starting to outline what are those partners that you possibly would need to have to implement some of the recommendations. Because your plan clearly is going to be built around a lot of partnerships. There's a lot of stuff the township can't do on their own, can't control on their own. You need to be kind of to some degree, the instigator or the convener to bring a conversation to a start, pulling people together to start that conversation. Scott, you, I think, had your hand up first.
Hey guys, can you hear me?
Yep.
Good. Again, as I've echoed in the last few of these things, greatly appreciated all the work you guys are doing and making all this stuff public for everybody to chime in. Most of your polling questions, I did not answer, so I was one of the ones that held out. Only because most of them are, and I'm sure they're designed this way, very pointed and controversial, I'll say. Toward the working on the zoning and revisiting zoning in our township. I'm not sure if you've personally had time to look through our zoning and read through it. Because the majority of stuff we've talked about is actually allowed and permitted in all of these districts. And to Tom's point, he wants to open up that houses on there as a bed and breakfast. Falls under, in that zoning district falls under multiple districts, actually, R2, special conservation and river conservation. Under both the conservation districts, which fall right into the flood zone areas, under conditional uses that are allowed in that area are bed and breakfast. Also in those are recreation related commercial uses. Something that you just mentioned about doing overlays for. There's no reason to do an overlay when it's allowed by conditional use.
Okay, so Scott, the part of the problem is because it is a conditional use.
Yep.
So right then and there, that means that property owner, Tom, has to go to the zoning hearing board, or I'm sorry, to the elected body to go through the conditional use hearing. So the first question we're raising to everybody, and I agree with what you're saying. You have parts and pieces that are currently in your ordinance. It's just not glued together to get to where you're trying to go. So why is a bed and breakfast a conditional use in that district? Explain that to me.
Certainly will, and it falls under the municipal planning code.
Okay.
Because under the conditional use, if you got a bed and breakfast, you have to allow for parking.
Yeah.
You have to allow for deliveries, stuff like that. And if you cannot just allow that kind of stuff to move into a residential neighborhood without some type of planning. That's why you put it in front of your planning commission, why you put it in front of your elected officials, to make sure that, that parking lot, if you're going to have 3 rooms in there, you have to have X amount of parking spots to accommodate those 3 rooms in there.
And
any kind of small commercial business, a little store, you have to have so many parking spaces. That's why you have to go in front of a planning commission and go through that process. That's written under the municipal planning code. You should know that.
Well, Scott, actually, we would handle that through a supplemental regulation. I can assign a parking ratio to any of those land uses you gave without having you have to go get a conditional use approval. I think we're both settling on kind of the same topic. There are parts and pieces that your ordinance allows you to do. It's not necessarily glued together to achieve what everybody's trying to achieve. There are some obstacles and impediments that are there that probably, with a little bit of sit down and just talking through what the nature of the issue is, that you could remove the obstacles. And again, typically a conditional use is used when there's something that is problematic with that particular use. And I'm not sure that a bed and breakfast that has 3 guest rooms and needs 3 parking spaces is going to be a problem. You may make it a conditional use if there's 12 rooms. That could become a problem. I fully agree with. So I think all we're trying to say is there are things that probably need to get tweaked in terms of the ordinance. And again, back to the housing, a lot of those housing choices are not permitted in terms of the residential districts. And that's the thing that started this whole thing about the zoning. Because right away people said, well, I can build a single family house, but that's it. And in most of the districts, you are limited in terms of what you can do. Now, clearly, density is an issue. I mean, nobody wants to see, an apartment building. Having an apartment above a store is one thing, but having an apartment building, that's a little bit too dense. So I'm writing down here in terms of we'll go back and look at the conditional use items, and particularly the ones you pointed to. But those are the types of things that I think we were perceiving, people are saying, why does that need to be a conditional use? Because that now becomes an obstacle. Some people don't even want to pay. I don't know. I don't think I ever asked the question, right? What's the cost of a conditional use hearing? Is it $350, $450 for the hearing?
It's $250. It's $500 for commercial.
So that in itself becomes a problem for some people because they just don't want to spend the $500 for that.
That part I do agree with, but in the same token, much like our commissioners recently did, rezoned an entire piece of property to light industrial and made a gas-fired power plant admissible by right. So now there's absolutely no controls over what that power plant does in that area in a residential neighborhood. That is what the conditional use thing does. All that does is trigger conversations. It's not an obstacle. Yes, do the commissioners have to sit through another meeting or a hearing? Yes, but oh, too bad. That's what you signed up for. These are conversations that need to take place to protect your township, to protect your neighborhoods. If you make all these things allowable by right, anybody can do whatever they want, wherever they want, without any consequence or without any restrictions or conversations to help protect your neighbors. Tom wants to put the bed and breakfast there. What do all his neighbors have to say? If you don't have that conditional use, you don't get to hear what they have to say about it.
And Scott, the gas power plant, I'm fully with you. I mean, there are uses that should be a conditional use just because of the nature of what they are. I think for the stuff that we're talking in terms of the recreation, that's a longer discussion, which we're not going to be able to finish this discussion tonight. But I got
Agreed.
you. I got you.
Now, our ordinance, in my opinion, it is very comprehensive. Do we need to go through a couple of steps here and there for certain things? Yes, but I think those steps are necessary to protect the neighbors.
Okay.
You can do just about anything you want in this township, but you just might have to hold a couple of hearings and hear what the neighbors have to say first.
Tom, I think you had your hand up too.
Patty. AJ, I know what Scott's saying, because we've been through a lot over the years. We've had a lot of questionable changes to our zoning ordinances, and we've had a lot of meetings where the public participated, and the zoning ordinance was not what the public had asked for. It was changed to be something else. And every time you talk about changing zoning, we cringe because we've been here. We know the results. We know what can happen. We know what's on the books right now that shouldn't be on the books, and goes to planning. Planning passes it to the commissioners. The commissioners say planning said it was okay, but meanwhile, all the people that were at the planning meeting said it's not okay, and it still got passed. So I can understand, I mean, you're looking at changes that, yes, we need to make, things that would be good, but we don't have a whole lot of faith in how the zoning would be changed and what it'll do for us, just based on past history.
Yeah, I hear you. I got that from Scott, and you're driving home the point. But we'll internally talk about what that means, and your past amendments. You gotta give me a little bit of history here, so I'm a little bit at a loss. So these were changes made to zoning that a property owner or a developer came in and proposed, or these were things that the township sat down and said, hey, we need to make these changes, and they went ahead and made changes to the ordinance.
If you're talking about the power plant, they came in, said, we want this piece of property, and the township said, here you are, we'll change the zoning.
Okay, so the everybody was reactive to what the proposal was.
Right, and the people in the township all said, all but one at the hearing, said, no, we don't want this. This is not an appropriate thing. You don't change the zoning to accommodate somebody that comes in and says, I want this. That's not how it works. We want safeguards, and we want to have things. We're talking about a lot of green space. We're talking about recreation. We're talking about all these things that you've just gone through that the township really, really wants. Yet things that they've approved are not things that in any way, shape, or form conform to what the people want for all the green space.
Yep. Okay. All right, any other questions in terms of what we covered or kind of our next step? Okay, so
If I can step in one more time, AJ, sorry.
Yep.
One thing that I think that we need to do, in the course of all this, these Zoom meetings are good and everything. It's kind of sad to see that we have, 14,000 residents in the township or something like that, and we've got 21 people representing them, right now. Admittedly, that's more than the committee we have representing us on the commissioners board. That's, immaterial. What? But what we need, so if there's a way that we can make it more known to the public that we have it, that would be good, that these meetings are going on. The only way that I even realized that this one was happening is I picked it up on Facebook again. So it would be helpful if we could figure out a way to make it more public, so that more people could participate and we could get a broader spectrum of responses. That's all.
Okay. Any other comments, thoughts? We'll all go eat dinner.
Thanks, AJ. Just appreciate your help. Did a great job tonight. Thank you.
We all do need to eat dinner, man.
Yes, I agree.
Get all jittery. All right. Thanks a lot, everybody.
Thanks, AJ.
Not to anger anybody, but I ate dinner while the meeting was going on.